This month's job statistics from Deed are out, and the state is chipping away at its unemployment rate. The state added more than 13,000 jobs last month, bringing Minnesota's unemployment rate to 4.4%, just higher than the national average of 4.2%. Locally, the market's been in fluctuation within the past few months, with layoffs at places like Jack Link's and the Mankato Clinic, alongside new additions at places like Rolls-Royce and the Walmart Distribution Center, adding jobs back into the market. Local analysts report an overall growth in the market, but the true effects of the recent activity won't be seen for a number of months.
We're seeing a mixture where some markets are slowing, but then we have other employers in other markets that are still growing incredibly fast and businesses that are still looking at the region.
Those local experts say it's difficult to draw conclusions with available data, as what's being reported at the federal level, they say, doesn't match with what they're seeing locally, as well as other issues with the data, such as layoffs being reported, but there not being an uptick in unemployment claims to coincide with them.
That's something we haven't been able to get an answer for yet, beyond the fact that we've historically struggled to get good quality data as a region, and they tend to make some sweeping changes after the fact.
In light of that data, GMG has made an increased push on their efforts to meet with businesses personally to gather more accurate local data.